Good afternoon. I am Pastor Mike Grobelch of St. John Lutheran Church in Long Beach, and I'm leading this study. If you have any questions or you would like to receive an outline of the study, please send me a direct message on our Facebook page, St. John Lutheran Church, North Long Beach, and we'll be happy to get a outline to you. Today we'll be beginning chapter 2 of the book of Ruth, with the first 5 verses, and let's read them together. Now Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go into the field and glean among the ears of grain after one in whose sight I might find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Now, there are several things that we know about Boaz. He was a nephew of Elimelech by marriage. He was highly influential in the community, and as the scripture tells us, he was a man of great wealth. Now, Ruth is going to go into the field and glean. The ancient Israelites would leave the sides of the field unharvested, and the people who were poor or the widows and orphans would go in and harvest the grain that had been left behind for them. It was in essence a privilege that was granted to them. In fact, it was a privilege that was granted them in the book of Leviticus, chapter 23 and verse 22, and again in Deuteronomy, chapter 24, verse 19. But it must have been a somewhat bitter experience because people were unaccustomed to charity, because permission was not always given, or the person granting the permission wasn't always kind and loving. But Ruth's love for Naomi was so sincere and faithful, she was ready to brave that ordeal in order to provide for her and Naomi. And Naomi gives her blessing, says, "Go, my daughter," for now she is utterly and truly dependent upon the efforts of her daughter-in-law to survive. As we go into verses 3 and 5, we get a little bit deeper. So Ruth she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Now behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem and said to the reapers, "May the Lord be with you." And they said to him, "May the Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant, who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" Ruth was unacquainted and did not know the lay of the land, and she simply walked to the first field. But God was guiding her footsteps into make her selection. Now we see that Boaz comes in and he first greets his workers and saying, "May the Lord be with you." And they reply, "May the Lord bless you." There must have been an excellent relationship between Boaz and his employees, because this greeting implies that there was a relationship that was not just merely employer-employee, but something more. And he, instead of just coming in and saying, "Hey, how's it going?" he offers this blessing to them. And in fact, if we think about it today, if we had such excellent relations with our employees, with the people who do work for us or who we work for, there'd probably be no need for committees for arbitrating disputes between management and laborers. Then Boaz asked, "Whose young woman is this?" He was familiar with the people in the town, and he didn't recognize Ruth. So he wanted to know excuse me, who she belonged to, whose family was she. Now we get into going into verse 6. The servant in charge of the reapers replied, "She is a young Moabite woman who returned with Naomi from the land of Moab." And she said, "Please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." Thus she came and has remained from the morning until now. She has been sitting in the house for a little while. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Listen carefully, my daughter. Do not go to glean in another field. Furthermore, do not go from here, this one, but stay here with my maids. Let your eyes be on the field which they reap, and go after them. Indeed, I have commanded the servants not to touch you. When you are thirsty, go to the water jars and drink from what the servants draw." Then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found such favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner?" The overseer, the supervisor of the reapers, his first act was to praise the humility and diligence which Ruth had shown, and included in that the propriety and reserve of her demeanor. She didn't have the "I'm entitled" attitude. She was courteous, she was humble, and it apparently, Boaz was frequently a person to allow the poor, the widows, and the orphans to glean from his field. And that his overseer had taken his cue from his boss. And this kindly and wonderful feeling towards people in need, especially in this case when they were humble and respectful. And if you think about it today, when somebody comes up to us and says, "Give me money," or somebody approaches us and says, "Excuse me, sir, could you spare some spare change or $1 so I can eat?" Which one are you more favorably disposed for? Of course, the one that is, that is nice, that is not feeling entitled. And the overseer wanted his boss to know that this person, this woman, was very humble and respectful. And, he then makes sure that he wants Ruth to follow the directions without hesitation that he has given her. She modestly stayed at a distance from the reapers and binders. And he said, "Stay here with my maidens and the women servants who were binding up the cut grain in sheaves." And right behind the binders, this is the place where the gleaning would be the most productive. You'd get the most amount of grain or food. And he charges his young men, "Don't bother her, don't touch her." And they may have occasionally indulged in some rudeness towards the poor gleaners. In this case, Boaz says, "No, I want you to treat her as one of us. And when you get thirsty, you drink from the same vessels, the same drinking vessels that my workmen drink from." This was a very kind offer. This time of the year, we're talking May, June, in the Middle East, tends to get warm, and water is something that is needed to ensure that you don't get dehydrated, and for the workers, that you can work at your full potential during the day. And even though Boaz was probably aware of the relationship between his family, and this poor woman, he practices no condescension. He assumes no patronizing air, but he protects her interest in a manner that would not be hurtful to her. And she is grateful as she bows down and touches the ground with her forehead in recognition of his kindness. And this is something that's really interesting, because she is very thankful, very humble in her thankfulness, and she doesn't want to do anything that might incur the wrath of either the overseer of the reapers or Boaz himself. Now, next week, we will go into chapter 2 a little further, starting in verse 12 to 20. And again, if you have any questions, if you would like a outline of the study, please DM me, and I'd be happy to provide that. And until that time, I thank you for joining us for this study, and may God bless you this week. Take care, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.